Hi everyone, it's Helen from SMB Deal Hunter. Today we have Connor Pera with us, an entrepreneur who bought a $2 million print shop in the Nashville area and also owns a small vending machine business. Very excited to hear Connor's story. Connor, great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's dive right in. Connor, tell me, what's your background? How did you kind of get into this acquisitions world?
Yeah, so I got into SMB acquisitions through business school. So I went to Kellogg for B school. And the intent when I went to business school was to pivot into CPG marketing, which is what actually brought me to Nashville. But while I was in school, I took a class actually on ETA and got introduced to the whole idea of buying a small business and running it and being an entrepreneur that way. I didn't really feel like I had an idea, like a lot of, I guess, acquisition entrepreneurs, an idea for like a tech company that
Mhm.
I wanted to start or but I have kind of always felt like I want to run my own business and kind of have an entrepreneurial mindset. So that whole process was super fascinating to me. But like I said, came down to Nashville to work in CPG marketing, and had a really good experience with that. But was doing the whole like corporate, work your way up and kind of play that game. And so I was just over the years I was doing that. I kind of felt like for a variety of reasons that a lot of entrepreneurs like don't necessarily love working in corporate America. I kind of felt a lot of those same things. But I also like started pretty much, like early on in my corporate career post MBA, like I was still very fascinated by like the ETA space. So I was, reading all the content and like listening to all the podcasts and stuff. And I listened to one with Quinn Miller, who I've since met, about his vending business, that just seemed really appealing. It seemed like a really cool side hustle opportunity that was like low cost, low risk. I mean, when I started the business, I put $3,000 into buying a machine and credit card reader and inventory. And like, uh, you know, from there, you're just like cold calling and selling to locations to place a machine. And so I kind of figured like, well, I've got like time outside my 9 to 5, and this is really interesting, so I might as well give it a shot. The worst thing that happens is I, lose my initial investment, which, I didn't really feel like was that big of a loss. So anyway, so then, I started doing that and realized that like I can make money outside of like someone else paying me a salary. And that was like the coolest. A lot of people like I think like just kind of know this intuitively, or like they're entrepreneurs by nature and they just kind of like see this from a young age. But for me, I guess it happened later in life. And like once I kind of saw that making money was not necessarily like providing for me and my family, and having an income was not necessarily like directly, didn't necessarily have to be directly tied to someone else paying me for my time. Like that was a huge aha moment for me. And so the vending business, like, even though it was a side hustle and is still like a super small business, kind of like planted that seed for me. So I took that knowledge about knowing that I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial full time into a self-funded um, SMB search, and ended up buying the Print Authority, which is a commercial printing business here in the Nashville area.
I guess I'm curious, why did you decide not to sort of grow that vending machine side hustle versus, going into and buying a business? What did that decision look like? Or was that even a decision?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think because of the whole like buy versus build dynamic, right? Like I think I probably was like a lot of people when they start a side hustle was like overly optimistic about the speed of the ROI. And I still think like vending is a really compelling business and a great side hustle for anyone who's interested. Um, but like I placed the machine and it took some time for like sales to ramp up. And I'm obviously like still making that money back. Vending is kind of a lot like investing in real estate for people who don't have enough money to invest in real estate deals. Um, because so much of success is driven by the location and the productivity of the location. Um, and so, but you're just cash flowing like a piece of space that people are going to naturally either like pass by or like make an impulse purchase or a planned purchase in some cases. But yeah, so the payback period was like long. I mean, it still could be like 6 months. But I kind of realized like, okay, I'm doing like, these sort of like call it $3,000 annual cash flow or annual revenue machine placements. And like I'm putting $3,000 into the like startup, like it's going to take a long time and like a lot of machines, and the operational complexity there is like gets like exponentially more complicated the more you kind of the more you expand. Not to say that it's not possible. I just felt like it was going to take a while. And I kind of still feel that way about the vending business. Like I still think there's an opportunity for that thing to become like a meaningful business for me and my family. It's just like right now I prioritize my time on the other stuff. But yeah, so it was like, okay, like it's going to take a really long time for me to build this to a business where it's like replacing my W-2 income. And so for me, it was sort of that like, why don't I just like skip the product market fit phase and like buy a business? Again, I I knew this path was out there and I knew people in my immediate network who had done it. So I kind of had that like frame of reference of like, what Walker Diebold talks about in his book, like the whole idea behind like buying an existing cash flowing business um, and all the steps that you skip when you do that in terms of being able to successfully and profitably run a business. So I think for me, it was very much like, yeah, I want to skip steps. So
Yeah, no, that's very logical. Makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people sort of feel the same way about, buy versus, starting. I guess curious, what did your search look like? Did you always know you wanted to buy a print shop, or how did you, land on the print authority?
yeah, I definitely did not set out to buy a printing business by any means. In fact, I had like a lot of people, a lot of searchers that I talked to, I had a like reflexive, like negative reaction to it. But my search, so I decided that okay, I'm gonna like do this. I'm gonna like look for a small business to buy. Um, and my wife was expecting our daughter at the time when I started this, and I kind of felt like time is of the essence a little bit in terms of um like getting moving on becoming a full-time entrepreneur. But at the same time, like I was for the most part like enjoying what I was doing. Had like really good relationships with my colleagues and but thought the work I was doing was interesting and fun and it was a good work situation. I wasn't like hurting myself by doing the work that I was doing on a full-time 9 to 5 basis. So I was kind of like, well, let me see like how far I can get doing like a self-funded part-time search. Like I'm just going to use my free time to like network with brokers, like lawyers, bankers, accountants, etc. And like try to ramp up deal flow and like try to look at deals and then kind of like do it like while I'm working basically. And so I was just sort of I was doing a lot of that stuff in my maybe not like the networking, like actively networking with brokers and stuff, but as far as like looking at deals on Biz Buy Sell, like consuming the content and like trying to learn about like how to put a deal together, like I was already doing that stuff in my free time anyway. So it's kind of weird, like when you launch, quote unquote, launch a self-funded part-time search there's no like launch date. I just like decided like, okay, I'm actually gonna like reach out to this broker. So for me, it was very much like I'm kind of like doing this already anyway. And I kind of had this plan of like, all right, I'm gonna start this in like a few months from now. But I realized like, well, I'm already like looking at all these deals and I'm like interested in potentially like connecting with the broker and hearing more about it. So like, why don't I just like start now? So that's what it looked like for me. And I was kind of like, okay, I'm gonna do this for like the next 6 to 12 months and see how far I can get. And if I'm not making the progress that I feel like I need to be making, then I'll kind of reevaluate like, should I do a full-time search and kind of go all in on this. And I ended up getting introduced to the opportunity by the print authority um super early on, like 3, 4 months into my quote unquote like active searching phase. And once I got connected to the opportunity and felt like good about it, I was kind of focused on closing that deal. And it just like sort of happened. I'm sure you have a lot of questions about like how I kind of ended up deciding this was the right opportunity, but it was one of those things where like I just kind of kept moving things along, and then like before I knew it, we were like at the closing table. That was the point at which I like started to freak out about like what I was doing. But before that, it was just like, okay, like let's continue to make progress on this piece of the diligence, and like this seems to be checking out. So anyway, it was weird, like in the sense that because I hear from people a lot, like, oh my gosh, like how did you manage to like get this done so quickly, like while working full time? And I don't know. I guess for me, it was just like it was like I don't know. It was just like what I was doing in my free time anyway, and I was just kind of like following the next step in front of me, and it like before I knew it, it was like okay, like we're closing next week. I'm like, oh,
What were
okay,
some
sweet.
what were some of the other deals you looked at that or did you look at a lot of deals and
I
actually
didn't. I mean, I looked at some, but I would say, I mean, I looked seriously at probably like seriously looked at like 5 to 10, and I only had like a handful of seller meetings, so it wasn't. And I think that's like the nature of like a part-time search too, is that like, I didn't have the luxury of like a lot of searchers say like, even if you're under LOI on a deal, like you should still be like, running your deal flow engine because, there's busted deals happen all the time. Like for me, it was like, okay, my time is very limited. Like I'm under LOI on this deal. Like
you're all in?
that's what I'm focused on. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I kind of felt like this is the one that I'm dedicating my time to, because it was a limited resource. So
Got it. Got it. I guess what was your goal sort of going into this? Was it to find something where there was some growth opportunity? Was it just to replace your W-2 income? Like how did you think about this? Was it just one of many acquisitions down the line? Curious what your goals were.
yeah, I mean, and it's kind of unfolded like post acquisition. I'm now about a year in. Like it's kind of unfolded. I feel like over time I've like been able to look back retrospectively and kind of understand a bit more about what was driving me to do this better. And I think for me it was to like get in the game full time. And so for me that meant like I want to not necessarily replace my W-2 income, but I want like to buy a business that is substantial enough that I can pay myself out of it. But didn't necessarily feel the need to like replace my full salary. And wanted to buy something and like I wanted to operate. And I love operating. Like that's I think sort of like something that differentiates me in the ETA community, certainly among the MBA searchers that I come into contact with. Like a lot of them have consulting and private equity or banking backgrounds. And so for them, like their unique value or their value add to the process is that they know how to put deals together and like they know how to find a good deal. for me, it was like I'm like an operator through and through. Like I don't know a whole lot about like building financial models. Like I know enough to like get the job done, but like I'm not gonna be the one who like finds some like sneaky financial arbitrage opportunity. Like I was very much like, let me lean into like the people stuff, which is like what I feel like I do know well. And let me like basically skip to the operating part. Like even when I was introduced to the concept of search, like I remember thinking like this is really cool, except for the part where you have to find a business and put a deal together. Like I just want to skip to like I'm running a business. And so for me, there was very much like that draw of like I want to operate something. And so I ended up like backing into what I would say is like a fantastic business with a ton of opportunity. Um, and I think like obviously like diligenced it and like felt that way about it going in, but I feel like I've felt even more confident. And look, obviously, like I'm fully invested in it now, so I have a lot of like financial weight at stake and like making this a success. So I may be admittedly biased on the outlook, but I do think that like I was less concerned about finding the perfect business and more concerned about finding a business that was a good business run by a good person that I could capably run. That was like
Got it.
fundamentally what I was trying to do. And I feel like this business checked those boxes.
Well,
And
look,
so
I
good.
I think that's a good segue into my next question. Can you tell us a little bit more about the print shop? What did you like about the opportunity? I mean, what do you still like about it?
Yeah, yeah. So it's small in the world of like search deals, I think, or maybe medium, I don't know. But we do last year we did just north of 2 million in top line revenue with about 15% EBITDA margins, give or take. And so I felt like it was like sizable. It was smaller than I thought that I wanted to go. But I did feel like it was a sizable enough business that like I could pay myself out of and was like generating cash flow to reinvest. But what I liked about it was okay, like first I would say me and the seller like just like clicked and had and have a really good relationship. And like I trust him and I I think he trusts me. Like we just have like a really good trusting relationship and we're kind of different. But in many ways we're similar too. So I think it was that sort of like quintessential like search funder like deal where it was like someone who was looking to retire from being a business owner full time. I had built a great business over the years, looking to hand the business off to someone who he viewed as like a younger version of himself in a lot of ways. So I think it was like very much that sort of relationship and that dynamic that I felt really good about. And I just like I got quite a few indications, like subtle things, where he was like, I could tell just like rigorously ethical and like forthcoming about information and just like knew I just like got a sense that he really like knew where all the bodies were buried type of thing and like wasn't uh, like hiding those facts. So I would say, and that's what I always tell searchers is like I put like a lot of weight into that. And again, I think because of my background, I didn't necessarily feel like I could put a lot of weight into the financial like structure and that I was gonna like come up with some like brilliant thing that was gonna, create a lot of value through financial engineering. Like I was just like, I'm gonna lean into like my judgment of people and like that's gonna be my thing that I bet on. And so I felt
Yeah,
really I can't like overstate enough like how many quote unquote like deal hurdles, if you will, like that fundamental fact of like good trusting relationship with seller like got me over. Like it was paramount, and it was like probably like 70% of the weight of like what made me feel good about the business was like, this is a good person who's really intelligent, who's built a really good business. Beyond that, though, I saw an opportunity to basically like blow out the sales and marketing effort. So it was one of those, in another like sense, like classic businesses where lots of like long-term loyal customers and loyal long-term employees, and virtually no, and we invested in SEO marketing like really early. So we actually have like a really good SEO strategy in place. So we get leads from Google, just organic. We don't do any paid, but so I was like, so what's your like sales process like? And they were like, well, we've got the SEO strategy going, and like we've got a lot of really great like repeat long-term customers that love working with us. And I was like, yeah, but like, so that's like, is there like any outbound like going on? And it's like, no. So I was like, oh, I can do that. I think anyway. It's a lot harder than I thought at the time. I've since come to realize. But you know, that was like an opportunity I saw right away, right? And again, I think it's just one of those like classic things that you find in some of these businesses is like a business that's like a really fundamentally sound business that would benefit from like increased just like energy and investment and like hustle around like sales and marketing, and then also just like professionalization opportunities that I felt like I saw too. So that was another big thing. And then the last thing that I really like about our business today, I liked about it at the time, but I didn't realize how much I liked it until I started operating, is our particular like specialty within printing, which is we do a lot of what's called web to print, which is essentially online B2B portals that we set up for multi-location businesses, franchisors, and like large corporate entities where we are their like print, promo, like wide format apparel, etc., like storefront. So it's like a B2B thing that they log into, like, oh, I got to order like business cards, marketing materials, flyers, whatever, but also like apparel, hats, t-shirts, um, you name it. And so we have like a recommended provider status with these multi-location companies. So for like a franchise, for example, it creates like this really beneficial, almost like, I mean, I wouldn't quite characterize it as recurring revenue, but it's like as close as you can get in printing, because we, you know, franchisee signs on to a new location and they get set up with all these vendor relationships, right? Like, here's who we use for this, like here's who we use for this, and then for all our print stuff, like we use the print authority, like here's your login. So, you know, like 90% of the time, like if you're a franchisee, like you're gonna go with like the recommended provider, unless like you've got a best friend who runs a print shop, right? Or the service and the quality and the reliability is like terrible. So then like our job becomes like invest the time and energy to like the longer sales cycle of like those larger systems. And then once you're in, like execute like really well on like just the foundational things, like answering the phone when people call, like resolving their problems promptly, like being attentive to their needs, like adding those like special touches to like show customers that you really care about them. And so like just doing all those fundamentals really well just generates like this effect of where they're like, okay, like I started using the print authority, like I'm getting good service from them. And then you start to like build that habit. And then so we get just the repeat order in an otherwise like job to job, like price competitive industry becomes like that's not really like the game we're playing. We do a lot of that. We do a lot of local work, project based, like job to job. So I mean, it's not exclusively our offering, but we're that's like our primary specialty. So I love that. Like it's so much stickier than like your typical like printing customer.
I
So
mean, the franchise partnerships is so interesting, especially because, franchisees are buying into franchises for the blueprint. So, theoretically,
exactly.
it's going to
Yeah.
the preferred vendors. So,
Yeah, exactly. And it's great because like our sort of like account relationship is with the franchisor. So that's always, that's good because that gives us access to the system. But then our like individual touch points are with the franchisees. So we can generate this like a lot of like goodwill between franchisee and franchisor. And it's just like a super valuable thing. So like then when we really get to know the franchisees well, like then like we start to hook into all the different like tentacles of this big system. And then, the switching costs become higher. It's still lower than like, right, like a SaaS product that's like, critical to running an operation. But the switching costs are not like insignificant when you can kind of like build these relationships that are very like interconnected between your company and like a large system. So I really, really like that. The downside of it is it's competitive too. Like we're not the only ones playing in web to print. And the other big thing is the sales cycle is longer. So it's like a much more of like a long-term play to build those relationships, to get those contracts. So that's like the drawback of it. But once you're in, and if you do a good job, like you can really you can grow, and then you can also benefit from the growth of the franchise itself too. So we've had a lot of those situations as well where we like signed with a franchise when they were like 10 stores and now they're like 100 stores. So those are awesome.
no, that's very interesting. I guess, this isn't your favorite part, but, just going back a little bit, how did you go about sort of financing and structuring the deal? Obviously, you got it done. So,
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those where I just like had to figure it out. I would say like I relied a lot on people who knew, and again, I was fortunate that I had sort of a lot of these people at sort of an arm's length, from my experience in business school and just people that I know locally. Um, but I would just kind of like ask for their advice about all the stuff I didn't know how to do and just like do what they told me. And it sounds like stupidly obvious, but that's what I did. And I ended up figuring out a way to get a deal done with like not, much of a finance or deal background. So I got a conventional term loan from a local bank, who honestly like probably would not have gotten that deal done today with today's lending environment like being much tighter. But I was able to do that, and then there was a combination of seller financing and equity that I put into the deal. But I knew that the SBA was an option, but again, I got advice from someone who has worked in small business M&A consulting, and at the time, rates were really creeping up a lot. And from what I had heard, like the SBA program is very much like a marriage, like a 10-year marriage. And so the flexibility is much less. And so his advice was if you can get a conventional loan and you can get a bank to finance like a substantial amount of the deal, then I would recommend going that route. And so they ended up lending 70% of the deal value on a conventional term
wow.
loan. So again, I don't think like they would in fact, I like pretty much know that they wouldn't like do that today for a first time operator. But yeah, so timing was definitely helpful in that regard as well.
Yeah, it's not common to meet someone who went and got a conventional term loan.
Yeah,
So
and a lot of people confuse this, by the way, with like meaning that it's non-personally guaranteed, but like it totally is. So I got hit up once. I posted something on Search Funder about like the deal. And I got hit up from a bunch of people who are like, how'd you avoid the personal guarantee? I was like, no, I didn't. It's fully personally guaranteed debt. So
I
yeah.
guess can you tell people a little bit about the difference between the two? Love to hear from your words.
SBA versus non-SBA, you mean?
Yeah, because it seems like, there's a lot of confusion probably around the personal guarantee amongst other things, I'm sure. So love to.
Yeah, I mean, I think what people hear is like, so the SBA, at least, again, I'm not like an expert on the program, but from my understanding is that it caps out at $5 million. Um, so I think typically, like if somebody's doing a deal for, like a $20 million acquisition deal, this comes up in like the traditional search world a lot. Like you're not going to get SBA debt for that because they're capped beyond. So that's when conventional banks will step in, and honestly, a lot of times, like as I'm sure you know, those deals, those businesses are like much more financeable. Like there's this paradoxical thing of like the bigger deal, like the easier it is to get capital for. Those ones are much more financeable. So you'll have a lot of conventional lenders that'll like want to lend on a business that's cash flowing like 5 million a year. So that's where it comes into play often. But what people don't typically know about is that regional banks like often offer like conventional acquisition financing. And usually like they're not going to lend 90% LTV like the SBA will. So like that's a con depending on the deal size, right? And like how much seller financing you can get. And usually the amortization is shorter. So like mine's a 5-year term, right? But the rate is much lower. Um, actually on an absolute basis, I'm still probably paying more in debt service than I would if I did a 10-year SBA, but it's like not double, not even close. So it's probably like 30-ish% more if I had to guess. Because my rate's much lower than what an SBA loan would have been. So a lot of that has to do with just obviously the financeability of the deal, the terms, your relationship with the bank and their view of you as an operator. But there are like banks typically, like it's almost never going to be like your big bank like PNC Bank or like Bank of America. Like those deals are like so small, they're off their radar. So if you go, like what I did was like I just called all the regional banks in Middle Tennessee and said like, hey, do you do acquisition financing? And a lot of them were like, no. And some of them were like, yes, we do. I was like, let me tell you a little bit about who I am and what I think I have. Are you interested? And so I got someone who was. Yeah, there is like a path out there. But again, like it's still personally guaranteed, right? So you don't get away from that, at least that I've seen on like a typical like self-funded search size deal. Like they're gonna want personal. It's just like from a bank's perspective, like it's just such a risky deal to lend on that like they're not gonna lend on it if you're not like personally guaranteeing your assets.
Yeah. How long did the process take, working with the
So
bank?
that's the other thing. Like it's way quicker, like way quicker. Like there was I mean, there was still like it's a bank, so still a lot of like red tape and whatnot. But it was like I remember meeting with them like a few weeks before we had decided like this is the day we want to close. And I met with my banker and he was like, yeah, man, like here's what we need. Like it was like a list of like 5 or 6 things. And he was like, once we get that, like we're good to go, man. We just need you to sign some, like come in and sign some stuff. Um, and so I was like super surprised pleasantly by that. And the other thing that's super nice about it is is the refinance ability and flexibility of it. So my my seller also owns the building and the real estate. Um, and so I was like, oh, well, I initially like thought like maybe I'll try to buy that too. Um, we ended up just not it just wasn't going to work. And I was kind of like, I'm not a real estate investor anyway. Like, what am I doing here? Uh, but, uh, but I like that, there's, if I'm a viable person to sell that real estate to, right? And so like, if, something were to work out, like, then it would literally be like a phone call to my bank to be like, hey, like, here's like a possible opportunity for me to buy this real estate. Like, what would that look like from you guys, right? And banks love like owner occupied lending. So they would. The question is like, would I have enough cash to probably to put the money down, and could I figure out a deal? But the financeability of it is a lot easier and more flexible than if I had a 10-year SBA term. I've not heard of people that have been able to like refi those deals unless it was um, something like significantly structural that changed. But for a conventional loan, like it's I'm sure there's a process and everything, but
No,
I
thanks for sharing that
yeah.
option. I feel like not enough people have, taken advantage of that, or, I love the hustle of just calling up all your regional banks, right? Like that's
Yeah, like
amazing.
I don't know. It's just like just call because I was like, hey, like, do you? I was talking to this guy. I was like, hey, do you have any like recommendations of like people who do this? And he was like, here's like some ideas, but like just call the regional banks. And so again, it was this process of me being like, okay, like this person's like done deals before, so he probably like knows what he's talking about. So maybe I should just do what he says. And then
Yeah.
like I
No,
had
that was yeah, that was great advice you got. I'm curious, I guess, how did you do diligence on the business, not coming from a print shop background?
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I I'm gonna sound like reckless. It really wasn't like again, I'll say again, like my relationship with the seller was like huge. Like I felt like obviously you verify all this stuff, but and I got advice on this piece of it too. So like I had like the customer list. So I was looking for like all the typical stuff, like customer concentration, like who manages the relationship. Like I basically was, I think like successful due diligence is like looking at as much as you can, like all the elements of a business and like replacing current owner with you or whoever you're planning to run the day-to-day operation and like understanding like what are the potential impacts of that change and like how do I mitigate those risks. And so that's kind of how I looked at that's kind of like the framework through which I looked at diligence. And I actually got really good advice from um another friend of mine who runs a holding company and he does deals all the time. He's not an operator, but he said his whole process is like purely, I mean, in addition to like the typical like diligence stuff, he says like the most important part of his process is like looking at the bank statements and just understanding how cash moves in and out of the business. So I looked at all the bank statements for the last like 3 or maybe even 5 years and like just put in an Excel, like beginning balance, ending balance, and then just like went through and just like followed the money, like literally beginning balance, ending balance, and like making sure that that lines up with like what they're saying happens like in the financial statements, A, and then B, like it gives you a really good sense of like, and again, I mean, you can only get so much information in a like a 3 to 4 month diligence period. But for me, it made me feel like, okay, like I understand like the way money is moving in and out of this business and like who the big customers are, like who the big vendors are, like how those payments impact like the way the working capital fluctuates. And anyway, so I would say like that was something like super tactical and practical for me that I maybe wouldn't have even thought of, which sounds like crazy. Like obviously you want to look at the bank statements, but now like if I were to look at another deal, like in addition to like the financials, like I would want to see bank statements and I would look at them, and just to get a really good sense of the way cat, because that's like ultimately like what you're buying, right? Is like
Yep.
cash flow. So
Yeah.
you want to understand like how the cash flows.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great advice. I'm curious, what how was the transition? Did when you guys closed the deal, did you quit your job immediately? What did that look like? And how did the transition go?
Yeah, pretty shortly thereafter, there was a period of time where I was paying the previous owner a salary to run it. And then there was like a transition period where we were both there. But immediately post close, we obviously announced the acquisition. Um, it was I kind of like used the classic search funder playbook in terms of how to think about that, which for me was like, look, I'm like, and I presented this to the team. I'm buying this business because like it's a fundamentally good business that I want to successfully run. And a big part of that is the people who run the business every day. So like I was as much as possible, as much as you can in that situation, like putting people at ease that like, hey, like I I bought this business because it's like a really sound business. So I'm not like coming here to like, just disrupt everything that's going on here. That's like not in my interest. So I do think that hopefully like helps. I think people are going to be anxious no matter who you are or like what you say. So for me, I mean, again, like I think leaning on like where I feel like I have unique value to add on the people side it has been like helpful. And maybe it's like too obvious or simple, but like I just like took everyone out to lunch individually, like when I first started, and like just talked to them about like their family and their life and told them about me. And like I don't know if that like, all of a sudden like made a huge difference in how they viewed me, but
That's
like
such a simple thing you can do, but it's like so
like
smart. Like, why would
like
you not do that?
yeah, I mean I feel like that's just like something that just like building rapport. Like if you're like generally a likable, intelligent, hardworking person, like people are gonna like spending time with you, like the more they get to know you. So I kind of think, and I felt that way about the people that I met here that like I've grown to love. Uh is like they're like smart, intelligent, hardworking people, and so like over time I've just like enjoyed being around them. And so I think that that's like important in something that is way, again, this sounds so obvious. It feels like almost cliche to say, but like way more important than like anything that you think you're going to do. Like in my case, like, oh, I see some opportunities for us to like reinvigorate the sales process. And here's what I'm planning to do. Like, it's that old like people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, which I think is just like an important way
Yeah.
to manage like a heavy transition like that. But yeah, and then I think the other big thing that I always like hit on that I think surprises people, it surprised me, is like when you do an asset purchase, how much stuff like just administratively like needs to get done very quickly and how big of a headache that is. Like changing tax IDs on like accounts and like vendors and obviously customers. Like you want to be super careful how you manage that. So all those things, but it's funny, like some of the like most like seemingly trivial things end up like sucking so much of your time. Like for us, it was like the credit card processing system, like getting updated to like the new tax ID and like the bank account. So it was just like that process. We must have spent like at least like a full working day, like trying to work through that. And it took a while before like that one got resolved. So anyway, that's like another piece of the transition that I feel like nobody talks about. And people who have closed deals, I talk with searchers all the time. Like if somebody set up like a consulting firm that was like a post APA like playbook team that would just like go in and like do all that stuff. It'd be a really valuable service. So,
Hey, that's an idea for someone out there. So
yeah.
credits to Connor, right?
Yeah, yeah. I want like a 5% royalty. So
I'm curious, I guess, how long did it take from, transitioning and really like learning, absorbing information from the seller to actually going and growing the business, like and moving in that phase? What did that look like?
Yeah, I think that in some ways, well, it's interesting. Like in some ways, I feel like I learn new stuff like every day, and I'm still like such a novice at running a print shop. But in other ways, like I feel very capable too. And so I think it's just kind of being new at anything. You kind of ebbs and flows for a while. But yeah, I was surprised during the transition, the point at which I felt like I was ready to like fly on my own. We had a 6 week transition period where we were both full time. And I valued like every second of it. But I would say after the 4 week mark, I felt like, okay, I'm ready for this to be like my business now.
Wow.
Um, not in the sense that, and I got to be really careful because it's like not in the sense that like, okay, I know everything now, but like they're just like it gets to a point where like of diminishing returns, right? Where like you're learning new things. And of course, like, look, I would benefit from the seller like sitting over my shoulder like all the time. Well, I mean, I don't know. We would probably butt heads eventually, but like, but from a knowledge standpoint, like obviously there's like still so much. Like he's forgotten more than I'll ever know over the next like 5 years about the printing industry. But so I don't want to say like, okay, 4 weeks in, like I've got it. I've got everything I need. But I do think like emotionally and sort of like from a culture standpoint, it starts to feel like, okay, like we're now like I know enough to like understand like how an order moves from order submitted to like out the door and like how that gets billed and paid for and all that stuff. Um, and so I feel like I'm ready to like trial by fire, like everything else. And so it just starts to feel too like culturally like this feels like my business now. And you don't want to like start to make changes or start to think about things differently when you're working with somebody who like built the thing and made it as valuable as it was like in the first place. So it just becomes like a little bit of a um I guess like redundant. Like I said, it hits diminishing returns like faster than I expected it would. But having said that, I definitely feel like the first week was like a complete blur, and I would never advise, nor would I have been. It would have been a lot worse if it would have just been like clean break day one, like no transition. So I think like there is definitely like probably like a month is like what I would say is like best practice. Because like I said, I was surprised that I felt like after a month, I was like, not that I know everything, but like I'm ready to like take the training wheels off and like go. Um,
Wow. I mean,
so
that's really fast. And how long was the seller, staying on for you? Like, how long did you pay him to continue on for?
yeah, a little bit, a few months. So he was there for like it was like a few months all told. So yeah, so it was a bit of a transition period. Um, but but yeah, and then and then of course like he left and like then like I was like shit, like I don't know what I'm doing now. Thankfully, the time he left is like we're a little bit slower, like in the summer months. A little bit of seasonality to our business, and so it was like it was good. Like I got to settle in a little bit when we weren't like super busy. But yeah, no. And then I think like as far as like figuring out how to grow it, like I'm still figuring that out. I've been really lucky that like the sales rep that I have, she's just like a superstar, and she's her accounts have been growing like gangbusters this year, and so the business is up double digits year to date top
Wow.
line. So we're doing really well. I think the questions I'm still struggling with are like typical like first time operator stuff, like getting better at managing cash and working capital, managing that more effectively, and then also like just like managing the operation effectively and like prioritizing and driving like accountability and uh like holding people accountable to KPIs and stuff. So I'm working on an operating system implementation as well. So I think with those things in place, I think we have a really good chance of continuing to have success. But I think like it's funny, like this year, like when we started growing like pretty substantially, I was like, all right, like this is awesome. This is giving me like confidence that what I'm doing is working. But then I like looked more into the data and it turns out like my sales rep is just like up 30%. So like she's the one who's like driving the results for the organization.
But you hired her, right?
No. She was here.
Oh,
Yeah. But I kept her on.
yeah, yeah. Smart. Okay.
So yeah. She's stuck with me, so that's been good. But
That's great. So what's the sort of focus on now? What does your role look like now? What sort of, coming up for you guys?
yeah, I mean, I think my role is still more working in the business than on the business than I'd like it to be. But I've started, like I said, with like an operating system. I started to like implement some of those things, like joining a peer group has been helpful, like um doing some of those things that are gonna get me the advice and like resources I need to go from working in the business to on the business. And that's kind of like what my biggest goal is this year, in addition to getting to 2.25 million top line, is like putting processes and systems in place so that I have more flexibility to spend more time on the strategy of the business and like where we're going over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, as opposed to like account management and like getting the orders out like today. And I kind of recognize that there's always going to be, at least for the foreseeable future, like there's going to be a bit of that. Um, but definitely want to, like a year from now, I want to be sitting here and like not have a bunch of stuff that I have to go like do to like literally just like keep the train moving effectively and efficiently, for the next couple hours before I start my weekend. But I'm also like I said, like the whole like skip to the operating part, like I'm also um I like love the simplicity and beauty of like getting things done. Um and I'm sure like you can relate to this, like building a business. Like it's so
100%.
empowering and meaningful to like knock out like a big to do or like a big task or like, just like get something like accomplished. And I really struggled that with that in like my corporate life. And I've probably like overcorrected for it because I'm like super involved in day to day, and like with the vending business, like I'm the one who stocks the machine and stuff. So like I'm probably overcorrecting for it, but I always kind of struggled because like nothing was like urgent at my corporate job. Like I didn't have to get like anything. I had a lot of stuff I had to get done, but it wasn't like, hey, like get this done today, or like this like invoice is not going to get paid, or like this customer is like not gonna, like this customer is going to leave. Like there was
Yeah.
none of that. And so I do love, like, as much as I would love to not be in the trenches all the time, or at least have the option to not be, like I do love like the beauty and the simplicity of like, okay, just like get it done, like get it out the door. And it's like so satisfying to like to accomplish things, instead of like just making like a little bit more progress on this PowerPoint that I have to present to like the VPs in 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
I don't
No,
know.
I love that. I mean, I totally agree with that. I guess I'm curious, are there more acquisitions on the horizon, or is this sort of the focus? Is the print shop the one and only,
Yeah, no,
plus the vending machine, of course.
I'm opportunistically open to the idea of growing through acquisition. As funny. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. Like, I still very much feel like geographically constrained in terms of like, because I want to operate, like, and I want to be the operator, be the person who like is in control. So for me, that's very much like limited my universe of like deal flow to like print shops my size or smaller in Middle Tennessee, which there's a surprising like number of those, but they're
Yeah.
not like all for sale, obviously. So, um, so I mean, that's kind of like how I'm thinking about it now is like if the right opportunity like comes across my desk, like through a broker, like a listing or whatever, like I'm totally interested in exploring it. But I know it's sort of funny. I'm sure you've had this experience too. I have this experience in the printing industry. Like once you like know how hard something is, you're almost like reflexively more averse to like doing it. Like so for me, like I tell people all the time, like this is like way harder than what I was doing in my corporate job. Like way harder. Like it's not even close. And because I know how hard it is to like close a deal and then have to like run the business, like I'm like very much like and like integrate all those things and like go through all the administrative headaches. Like I said, I like it's got to be like really compelling or like a really good fit. And then industry wise too, like now that I'm in the industry and I know a lot, like there's certain things that I would have just like breezed by before I was in the printing industry where I'll look at them now and be like, wait a minute, they do what? Like, oh my God, like that's like the hardest way to make money in this industry. Like I have no interest in like that kind of work. So therefore I'm not interested in that business. So it's kind of funny. Like I've become like more picky about the types of print shops I would like to add. And just like knowing how hard it is to like successfully operate a business that you acquire, like I'm like it like better be a really good opportunity because like it's gonna involve like a ton of pain.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I guess all the challenges considered, are you happy with this decision to get into entrepreneurship through acquisition, or what's your sort of take?
yeah, totally. I mean, I would say I am so much more like professionally alive and engaged and motivated being my own boss. And like um it's funny like before I made the decision to go all in and full time on this, I sort of thought through like, what's like the worst case scenario? Like what does the absolute worst downside look like? And yeah, it's pretty financially, it's like really, really bad. But I also think, and I know there's like this business size debate out there. I
Bigger
have
versus smaller? Yeah,
yeah,
I want
yeah,
to hear I want to hear your
I have a different point of view than sort of like the conventional bigger is better because of this like downside protection piece. Because for me, like, so for me, it was like the worst case scenario is like, okay, like it doesn't go well. And then I have this loan that like, I'm in default on. And so for me, like it's still small enough to where I felt like, okay, I could probably like figure out a way to make the absolute worst case scenario, prevent that from happening. And then I'm just like sort of in this really difficult financial spot for a while, but I could go get a job. Like I could go work for someone else. Like it's not like I don't have marketable skills. And so I was like, okay, like what's so bad about that? Like I'm doing that now. I'm working for someone else. And and so that was a big thing for me, like considering the worst case scenario and then being like, okay, what does that actually look like? Like, would that be so bad? And like I don't want to like minimize the seriousness of the financial risk, but for me, it felt like, okay, keep playing this out. And like what it ends up as, like, is me under more financial stress, which is not good, but working for someone else. And I was like, I'm already doing that. And so I was like, well, that's really not that bad of an outcome. And then now that I don't work for someone else, I'm like, working for someone else seems like a really bad outcome to me.
Yeah,
Like I
totally.
like I don't
Hard to
uh
go back, right?
yeah, it's like it is funny how like you go from like, just like that, like I said, like so much of my life, certainly like my childhood and early working years, was like dominated by this idea that like the way to earn a living is to like work for someone else for a salary. And so that was just like kind of what I thought you
Yeah.
do, like people do in the world. And so I and now that I'm like out of that, it's like that, like the whole like red pill thing. Like it's like I don't want to go back to that. Like I don't
Yeah.
that was exhausting.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I guess I know we're at time, so I don't want to, I want to be sensitive of, all your generosity here, but, any final words of wisdom to all the first time buyers out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I run into, and I talk to searchers all the time and I love it, and I'm happy to like share my contact info and have people reach out to me. Um, but the biggest thing I run into when I talk to searchers is that they are looking for certainty, and that doesn't exist. So I would advise people to like immediately dispose yourself of the idea that you can find the perfect business. It doesn't exist. Like, and immediately like rid yourself of the idea that you can find a risk-free way to make a lot of money. Like that doesn't exist. That's a fantasy. And I think if being a full-time entrepreneur has taught me anything, it's that everything has a cost, like everything. Every decision you make, like somebody's paying for that. And when you're a full-time entrepreneur, it's you're the one who's always paying for it.
Yeah.
But before, like when you're not an entrepreneur, like somebody else is paying for that, like for those decisions that you're making. And there's always a cost. And so whether or not you see the cost is a separate question. So I think like just going into it with the idea that like you got to accept like that there's uncertainty and risk, and like you got to be comfortable with that. I think like oftentimes like a lot of particularly like highly educated ambitious people is their own worst enemy is like themselves, like thinking that like their mind can figure out a way to find like a sure thing. Or like the question I get most that there is no like definitive answer for is like how did you know that this was like the 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 deal that was like that you wanted or whatever? And the answer is like I didn't. um
You're a genius. You just knew.
like nobody knows. Like that's the secret, right? Like nobody knows. We just like we have like a point of view. We have like research and diligence and like some ideas, and we are comfortable like making a leap of faith based on those
Yeah.
things. But nobody who buys a business, I mean, if they are, I want to meet anyone who goes into the closing table certain that they're going to like achieve their goals. I've never met that person. I've never seen that business. I mean, maybe like if you can figure out a way to buy Google or Apple, those businesses are like maybe risk free, but they also trade at like 25x multiples. So if you can raise like couple trillion dollars, then maybe you can find a risk free way to like generate cash flow. But unless you're that person, there's always you got to be like comfortable with knowing that like you're not gonna know.
Yeah.
um
No,
so
totally. Look, I love that advice, Connor, and that's a great way to end, today. I guess last question is just, what's the best way to reach you for those that are, inspired by this interview and, want to reach out?
Yeah, you can reach me on Twitter at Connor Pera, or you can just email me, Connor, Connor, at theprintauthority.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Connor. I really, really appreciate your time today, and I think people will, get so much out of your story and all the advice you gave. So thank you again.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Happy to help.
Yeah. Thank you.